welcome to our show. During the interactive fireside chat tonight, we'll explore how UX hiring managers actually hire candidates. We have invited an awesome guest speaker who is a UX director and has a ton of experience with that, and we'll share lots of insights with you and answer questions. We will introduce our wonderful guest in just a few minutes. For those of you joining us for the first time, my name is Michael. I'm the founder of a company called BeginX. It is a part-time UX career accelerator based on real mission-driven client projects that helps people who know UX basics transition into the UX field in one of the most efficient and affordable ways and without quitting their jobs. And I don't mean this to brag or anything like that, but just wanted to give you a little bit of a background for credibility purposes. We have run quite a few cohorts by now and helped over 140 people or so get hired into UX roles. We'll tell you more about the program itself and also make a special announcement closer to the end of the event because it may be a great opportunity for some of you here. So here are some of the companies that those grads that I was talking about have been hired by. So we've seen lots of people go through this whole entire career transition. Before we jump into the discussion, let's briefly set the stage and for that discussion and cover a few quick concepts that will help guide the discussion effectively. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this as we basically want to give our guests an opportunity to share all of their insights and give you an opportunity to ask lots of questions. And by the way, we'll also share a UX career transition roadmap handout at the end of the event. So stick around if you'd like to get that. If you have been to some of our virtual events before, and you might have seen some of these principles and slides, so they may look familiar. So just bear with us as we want to make sure those who are new to our events get this quick but very useful overview as well. So the new way, right? Starting with the end in mind, right? So essentially you want to UX this whole career transition journey and think from the standpoint of an employer. You want to become a candidate who employers look at and think, this is definitely someone who can solve their specific problems and basically hit the ground running and bring value to our company. And they need that validation proof that you can actually do that. They look for that when recruiting and evaluating your application, right? So here's a quick overview of the key competencies you need to gain. We'll explore all these areas later. All right, so as you can see, it's basically hard skills, softer skills, real experience, 3+ UX case studies, and on the right side, right, that's more of a job search elements and items, right? So portfolio, resume and online presence, mastery of effective UX job search strategies, as well as interviewing and storytelling mastery. Okay, so how did we come up with this? Well, definitely not out of thin air. So as you can see here, we did quite a bit of research. So interviewed, analyzed hundreds of candidates, interviewed, probably more than 50 employers by now, analyzed job postings, ran tons of events. So essentially we used the UX process and did a ton of research to identify the key roadblocks people experience in this transition journey and gain insight on what is needed in order to design a better way to solve these problems and make this transition effectively, right? Then synthesized all that research, identified common themes, all right? And again, one of the key takeaways is just to start with the end in mind and clearly understand what you need to achieve to actually be that really attractive candidate, really attractive to employers, so you can actually get hired and not just learn a lot of stuff and then get stuck after that. So very quickly, a few quick, simple steps, right? So basically, we start with just learning the essentials, right? This is just the overview of the entire UX career transition. And for today, we'll focus specifically on the job search phase and UX hiring and interviewing processes. So first, you learn the essentials, key principles, concepts, UX process, methods, etc. Right? Then the next phase is probably the longest and the hardest one, right? So we call this phase practice and grow, right? So this is where your real learning happens. You gain skills, experience building takes place. This phase is mostly about applying, practicing, learning things in more depth in the process, advancing your skills, and building real experience, okay? So the next phase is about creating all those search assets, as we call them. This essentially involves packaging and presenting all the skills and experiences in an effective portfolio, resume, and online presence, a key phase necessary to position yourself as an attractive candidate for your job search, right? We'll definitely touch a lot on this phase during our discussion with our awesome guest today. All right. And finally, the search prep and execution phase, right, which involves learning and mastering effective search strategies, the UX interviewing process prior to actually kicking that search off. We'll definitely explore this area quite a bit as well. Okay. And we found that a lot of people like this product to service analogy, so we refer to the first two phases and as basically learning and building, right? It's quite similar to building a product essentially, right? So we just call it learn and build stage. And then the last two phases are very similar to marketing and selling of that product, right? So that is how we refer to that stage. So essentially the first big mistake that people make is they do not build a great product that is attractive to employers, right? And which means you do not develop your skills sufficiently, or you do not have any experience. And if the product is not great, it will be very hard, if not impossible, to market and sell it, right? So even if you're a master marketer. So the other big mistake that people make is after building an amazing product, they do not devote much effort to really understand and what marketing and sales is all about, right? So they think that just having the skills and experience is enough, and then it is just a matter of applying to tons of jobs, meaning they do not really understand any of the science behind marketing and sales, what those are, which means they do not put effort in order to position themselves as an attractive candidate, do not learn effective search strategies and how to actually navigate that hiring process successfully. And if you do not do that, you can get stuck basically looking for jobs for a very, very, very long time if you get there at all. And this slide summarizes, right? So you can see all those key competencies you need to gain and how they map nicely to this career transition journey, right? So it's a simple diagram, but kind of can be very handy in terms of like the full picture that you need to make this career transition. So this is essentially a high-level view of what you need to have to be a highly hireable candidate and basically how and when you can attain that. So some of the key points, and then we'll jump into our discussion, which I can't wait to do. Starting with the end in mind, right? To understand where exactly you need to get to become that highly hireable candidate by employers and how you actually get there. Then ensure you have a solid product before you start all the selling. Otherwise, you can waste months or years. Once you have that solid product, it is key to learn, practice, and apply the principles and best practices behind marketing and selling in order to get hired faster. And do not confuse what phase you're in, right? Understand where you are and what may be blocking you from making progress, and focus on what is important, most important at that moment, right? So do not spread yourself too thin. And doing too much at once, right? Doing too much at the same time is basically, will yield very, very little progress. All right. Awesome. So that's it for setting the stage. Let's jump right into our discussion. Now let's get to the most fun part and introduce our awesome guest speaker. And then we'll jump into the interview. It is so great to have you here, Noelle. Thanks again for joining us. Would you like to briefly introduce yourself to our audience?
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm happy to hear all the Brooklynites out there. I too also live in Brooklyn, so I think that's cool. And actually, someone who works with me graduated from this program, so I am familiar with this program as well. So I'll just start by saying I currently work at American Express. I know some people probably looked me up on LinkedIn beforehand. I am speaking from myself and my own perspective and the research I've done as far as when I was looking through the hiring process, my experience, my time kind of studying this as I was building out a hiring process as well. So I'm speaking from my own personal brand here, not from the Amex brand. Cool. So with that said, a little bit about me. My history is an interesting one. Probably like a few people on the call here, I've seen people saying that they're in job transition, and that's awesome. I also transitioned from another role. I was working in product marketing for a hot time, demand generation, product itself. I even took some front-end web development courses and learned how to code. That's gone. But what really, really stuck with me that I noticed in all those different roles was this love for real empathy for the user, building products that made things easier for people, some of the visual solutions and designing, as well as some of the analytical ability to take qualitative and quantitative metrics. And I was talking to someone one day and they're like, that's called UX. I'm like, that's interesting. And so alas, I found myself in one of these courses, a part-time course actually, because I couldn't take full-time off. And I learned about UX. I realized that this is in fact the love I had. And now I'm on to the next phase, which is actually applying for that job. And so I've been in your shoes before. I know what it feels like to come out of a boot camp and ask, well, what makes me actually marketable? And I'm here to talk to you about that today. So for a little bit of background there, I have hired people who are entry level into the UX world, who are senior level into the UX world. I've even interviewed directors. I have interviewed people for roles in generative UX, meaning someone who can do both the design and the research, full scope, as well as design only, research ops, UX strategy, research, ops strategy. So I've done the whole gamut and I've seen a lot of different things. And for each of those different roles, there are different things that you want to prepare for and how you want to think. The overall kind of like general understanding of it is that everything does become how you personalize yourself, and also an understanding of how that role is and what tasks that role is really targeting. So we'll talk a little bit about that today. I'm going to talk a little bit about how it is to prep for an interview and the mindset you should have kind of going into it, maybe some questions to expect to ask, things that you should expect to see. And then lastly, and this is the part I actually think is the most interesting, which is I'm going to talk a little bit about how to actually move up in your career without thinking of it strictly as the form of I have to interview right or I have to have the perfect case study. These other tactics that you can kind of do simultaneously are what's really going to push your career forward, and it's going to happen a lot more naturally. So we'll share that at the very end, but I want to make sure I get through kind of the specific things that everyone I know is the elephant in the room. Cool. So
awesome. Noelle, that's great. Thank you for the introduction. Yeah, we have lots of questions for you, and then we'll take lots more from the actual Q&A from the Q&A tab from the chat. For the discussion today, right? So overall, we'll discuss the main phases of the entire UX hiring process, right? Including how managers find, screen, evaluate, select candidates, as well as some tips on how one can improve and become a better candidate. We'll touch on areas like various job search assets that we were talking about, like portfolio, resume, like presence, hard and soft skills, the actual interviewing process, and more, right? So with that said, let's kick that off with Noelle. What do you think are the biggest things that prevent newer or more junior candidates from getting hired or make them less attractive to an employer?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the thing that comes to mind actually is once they're in the interview. A lot of people come out of boot camps with a very similar portfolio, a very similar case study, right? It has the same flow, it has the same information, it almost becomes templated. And so the question that really comes to me is, who are you and what specific skills can you bring? You've already captured the first part for me, which is you showed that you're interested in UX by investing time and money, right? You took a class, maybe you did freelance, you spent that time outside. So I already know you're interested. If you haven't done any of that and you're applying, even if you have a related role, like a product role or whatnot, I'm not interested at all. I'm going to just say, come back to me after you've taken this class and learned the basics, right? But let's assume that you've done all those things and you do get to the interview. You have to personalize yourself, make yourself unique. And there are a couple of ways that you can do that. So the first thing that I look for is I'll usually ask someone, tell me exactly what role you played in this work. And I'm not looking for someone who necessarily said, I led the whole thing, I did the whole thing. Because in the workplace, it's not about the I, and it's about the user. It's about the team, how the team achieves a goal. So what I'm really looking for are more specific, nuanced answers that are like, my team was discussing the research, and our assumptions were that it was going to lead to these specific findings, but it didn't. And I was actually one of the people who uncovered this particular insight. And this insight ended up playing a huge role in our design solution, or we ended up changing our roadmap in terms of what we were going to build first in the priority order. Even though it's nuanced pieces, what they're demonstrating to me is they're talking about a specific tactic. So this person knows how to pull insights in an interesting way. That's cool. 2, they're pulling insights in a way that's so impactful, it's going to actually impact the roadmap. And then 3, they're actually having a conversation with the other people they work with, and they're influencing them, and they're collaborating with them in a way that everyone agrees and aligns and is able to move forward. So I've seen a little bit of soft skills in that answer. I've seen individual kind of research skills, and I've seen team collaboration, someone who I would want to work with, right? You don't want to work with someone who's always saying, I. The ego is not attractive, right? And so I would say that's one thing that doesn't usually come out. A lot of people are really afraid to promote themselves or to brag about themselves. They'll say, my team did this, or we did that, or they won't take the time beforehand to really prepare for the interview and think about those small little nuanced pieces, because they'll say, well, that was so tiny, I didn't actually do the designs, or I didn't actually do the research, so I shouldn't call out those little areas. But it's those areas that are really, really interesting. I was in an experience where someone said something like that. They had actually discovered something so interesting, and they managed to tell their stakeholders about this idea, and it changed their roadmap. And that, I stopped an interview process, and I was like, we're not hiring anyone until everyone has interviewed this person, even though it was like almost right off at the cutoff. It's those little pieces, those golden nuggets, that show me how you think. And so that, to me, is a very, very interesting thing that you want to make sure you bring out in the storyline.
Wow, no, I think you might have answered like half of our questions already. just kidding. So where and how does your company actually find candidates? Like, which channels or methods did you use, and why? Like, is it, and just to give you kind of more, is it referrals and networking? Is it online job board postings, sites, recruiters, et cetera? Like, what channels do you guys use?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll actually speak more generally about this, because just how one company does it is not that interesting. So there are a lot of different companies out there, right? They're small, medium, large, they're startups. Everyone kind of recruits differently. So in some ways, it's very much a numbers game. You just want to, send your resume out to as many different places as possible. And also, I'll say, don't look too closely at the title. It does not matter. The titles of these companies they're different everywhere. What a UX designer means at one company is a senior at another, or maybe even a generative research and designer at a third, right? So I would just say apply. Don't look too closely at how it's written. A lot of these things happen on job boards, right? So like LinkedIn, any of those other methods out there that you can apply to. What I've found, and especially now, is a lot of that is really saturated. So I don't know if anyone's done that recently and applied on LinkedIn, and you look and it's like 1,000 people have applied to this in like 2 days. That's really intimidating. And I would agree, like the market right now is kind of saturated with a lot of the changes in the tech world, with Google, with Amazon, and Twitter. It's a little intimidating. So sometimes it can help to have an in. That's where having a network is really, really important. So being able to say, hey, I know you work at this company. Do you know the hiring manager? That's a really great way to start to get your foot in the door, but it's still kind of like a cold-ish way to get in, because that friend or colleague of yours, they may not have any influence. They may not be the hiring manager. They may not know the hiring manager, right? They could certainly get your resume looked at, but you don't really know, especially if the company is super massive. My favorite way to do it is to actually go to LinkedIn and to look at jobs and companies that you like. Type in the company and look up like UXers there, or look up UX roles and do all of the different searches: generalist, researcher, designer, product designer, UX, UI, whatever you can. Google all of the different search engines, optimization words if you want to, and pick a couple of people and just say, hey, I'm in this boot camp. I'm new to UX. I just graduated, or I'm transitioning, whatever your story is. I just want to talk to you about what it's like in the real world with a UX job. Is this what you expected? Don't look for an interview because it's going to seem very salesy. Everyone knows that's probably what you're after anyway, but they don't want to feel like the end goal is that you're not going to listen to their advice and you're just there to like throw a resume in. Really look to talk to them. And when you do talk to them, that is an interview, whether you realize it or not. So you want to talk to them and show them what you've got. Talk to them about how you think about UX, what you're passionate about, where you want to grow. Don't be afraid to share where your weaker skills are. Hey, I'm weak here, or I don't know where my weakness is. Can you help me point it out? Be vulnerable, be sincere. If that person has a good experience with you, they're going to remember you. And the next time a role opens up, if you see it, you can write them and be like, I saw this. Can you, help me get a role, right? That actually happened to me. I got into an interview phase because I was just looking to see what was out there. And I was like, oh, cool, like biomedical UX research stuff. Let me write this person and see what it's about. And we had an amazing conversation. And then she posted a job offer, and I got into an interview through that process. And we skipped over the first part of the interview. It's usually 3 parts. She's like, you're already passed on to interview round 2 and 3. Go for it. So you never know what those sort of relationships are going to look like. And that's how you really network. So I know it's all about the pressure of just go and find somebody and like force the network. Don't do that. You don't want that. It's gonna come off. Everyone's gonna be able to tell. Do it from a sincere place. If where you're at right now is you really want to network just to meet people to see if you like a job, honor that emotion and it'll show and you'll build a relationship. If it's, hey, I really love this skill set, I'm great at it, but I want to get better. Let me just go ask somebody, hey, can you be a mentor with me and teach me these skill sets? You're going to build a relationship. So essentially what we're talking about here is a part of the job process is actively making an effort to build up networks through mentorship so that people know what it's like to work with you, know how you think, right? Know what your personality is, so that when they do open job opportunities up, you're either first of mind, or when you do write them, they recall who you are and they're already like, I already trust this person, right? So I was going to wait till the very end to talk about this. This is a great question. I really cannot stress this enough. That's why I keep talking about it. If there is one thing that you do this week to get a job, let it be going and finding 3 mentors that you really connect with and not like putting in a resume. I think that is even more impactful and it'll have an exponential return in the end.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Noel. This is great. Yeah, I think that's definitely a great point. We actually, even like in our own program guidelines, like after people graduate, recommend just reaching out, basically this network. I mean, I'm sure most people already heard how important networking is, but not everyone does it and does it actually well, right? I think it's a great point that you mentioned, kind of not seeming and being desperate, basically just building relationships and doing something like informational interviews. For example, I can talk about my favorite book, which I talk about all the time on most of our events, called 2-Hour Job Search. Just kidding, it's not the favorite book, but it's one of the favorite books about job search, right? And it's basically a whole system. And we're not affiliated, maybe we should be, but I've probably told like thousands of people about it already. But anyway, it's basically about how to use networking and how to do informational interviews to build your network and then ultimately land a role. Okay, so sure.
Can I actually, before you ask one question, I'm just like reading through the chat briefly, and I see someone has written something about if you are sincere, most of the time you don't get the job. I'm not sure the whole message of that, but I will say, to clarify what sincerity means in this case, it is honoring where you are in your process and really thinking about the skills you want to build and the career you want to develop, and to think of it more in terms of how am I growing as a person? How are my skills getting better? How do I know that I'm a valuable asset? And if you focus in on that instead of focusing in on, hey, please give me this job, I promise I'll be great. It comes from a very different place. The way you talk ends up being very different. And the best way to do that is to work with mentors. and to really try and get your skill set up and to really focus on your skill set. By default, the mentor who's working with you will see that it's not about how it looks or the end goal, but that the end goal is really the value that you're gaining, that you really are becoming a better asset, one that they want, and one that, could leave at any time, that they should probably keep and work to keep. So hopefully that answered that question.
Awesome. So we already addressed one question from the audience, so that's good. We'll take a ton more in a bit as well. So Noelle, I think you might have answered part of this already, but feel free to add what you haven't answered yet, right? What do you think is the best way for someone to get noticed by hiring manager like yourself, right? So maybe some more additional important tips for someone searching for their first UX role, especially maybe you already touched a lot on networking, but anything else you want to add?
That's a great question. So I've actually had the experience where people have written me on LinkedIn afterwards, and sometimes it happens a lot after speaking events, right? Like that makes a lot of sense. And if it's like the first few people, I can probably read it, and if I'm not too busy, I can get back. But what I have noticed is sometimes when work and life get really, really intense, which they are right now, it can take months. And so I imagine that if you're looking to network and to get noticed, you're probably going to reach out to someone on LinkedIn, like I recommended, and you're going to be like, this person never wrote me back, right? How do I get their attention? And so my recommendation for that is you can say, hey, I'd love to talk to you about XYZ, blah, blah, blah. Do you have time? If you don't, is there someone else you recommend that I could speak to? And to me, I'd be like, okay, this person really does care just about networking and mentoring. It doesn't have to be me. That pressure doesn't have to be there. And I usually write back. I even had someone once ask me, do you have any podcasts that you listen to that you like? And I was like, oh, cool. I'm actually going to ask around like my friends and colleagues if they have any. That's kind of interesting. And I don't necessarily remember who that person's name is, but I know that when I go to hire again, I'm going to skim through who wrote me, and I'm be like, oh, that person like cared about doing some proactive learning on their own. So the people who kind of are, again, not necessarily thinking of just getting their resume straight to me because that's all it's about, but who are really thinking about self-development, and they're thinking about the steps to that, and I'm a resource to help them. And if I help them, great. If I don't, great. They're going to continue anyway. That sort of kind of independent, proactive, learner is a very attractive person in my eyes.
Let's talk about portfolios briefly, right? So imagine you have portfolios and resumes of many candidates in front of you, right? Whole table. How exactly do you pick who to interview?
This is a funny one. So I know so many people who look at the resume first. I am not one of them, but almost everyone else I know is. They love to skim the resume. When I do skim a resume, or when I'm like kind of forced to, these are the things I look for. I don't care where you went to college, but I do look to see if you have some sort of relevant experience in the field. For example, if you did graduate with like design, that's pretty cool, or psychology, that's like also kind of interesting. But if you didn't, that's not going to impact me at all. The other thing I think I look for too is, did you go and get secondary education on this specifically? Did you go to a boot camp? Like, I actually do think that's pretty awesome, because it shows that, you're learning the skills. There are only a few schools out there that are really teaching this. And some of them are in like the masterclass place, like Georgia Tech or Carnegie Mellon. Obviously, if you have those on your resume, it's kind of like the Harvard of UX courses in some ways. But that's like sometimes a 2 multi-year full-time programs, like going back to college. Not a lot of people have that opportunity or those resources, right? So again, that's not like something that I like hold against someone, but it's something that I look and I'm like, oh, that's interesting, right? That's about the only thing that I do look at when I look at schools, and it doesn't really impact me that much. The other thing I look at is I might do a quick, view on what they've done before. So have they always worked in this industry? Did they come from a similar like-minded industry like engineering or product or design? I work with a couple of people right now who came out of fashion. I came out of marketing, so that's pretty cool. I think it's great to see career changers. I myself am one. One of the things I think is really beautiful about it is that individuals who come out of a previous career already know how to work in a business environment. They also bring up a lot of soft skills. Michael, you mentioned this at the beginning. It's hard skills and soft skills that are important. 100% agree. If anything, soft skills are more important when you're getting an entry-level job. They will pretty much differentiate you from your other teammates, even if your technical skills are weaker. If your soft skills are so strong, they're great. And so you can sometimes build into your resume through the things that you've done some of the soft skill elements. And we can talk about what that is later if that's a question or not. So I'll look for some of those things. The other thing that's really, really cool, and this is just best practice with resumes, is you don't want to be generic. You don't want to say, I conducted research for Project Cupcake, right? You want to say, I conducted, quantify it, 6 interviews for a project that lasted 8 months and 2 weeks, that had the opportunity of driving revenue of $100,000, right? And that's interesting. Why? One, because it lets me know the scope of this work, how much time and effort it may have taken. One interview that you did with your mom, over the weekend doesn't count. A 6-piece interview, you actually had thought into that. How long is it? Did you do it in a weekend? Or was this a much more complex project? Complex projects tend to be over several months or so, right? So that starts to tell me what the technical needs were for that project. And last but not least, if you're able to put the KPI next to it, the performance indicator, for example, how much revenue might I earn from doing this correctly? How much time might I save? That shows me that you didn't just think of UX as being a wireframe or a UI or a mock. I delivered an asset. Hire me, please. Nope. You thought about the customer behavior change that was going to happen. You thought about the outcome. You thought about UX strategy. And the people who think more from a strategic perspective as part of like, well, why am I doing this work? Why would someone pay for me to do this work? And of all the things that we could do in this economy, why would they choose to spend money on this? That perspective, that kind of business mentality is super, super key. So again, best practice, try and quantify where you can. You can't always, but it's always really helpful for things that don't have, specific KPIs. You might even think about, I led a team of 2 on a project that took 2 weeks, that led to somebody on the team getting promoted or something like that, or speaking at 2 series because I learned so much about this project, right? So the impact can always be different. It doesn't always have to be about money, but think creatively about it, and where you can, throw it in as often as you can, but obviously doesn't have to be everywhere.
Awesome.
That's the resume part. That was, and then the case studies, you also wanted me to talk about the case study? Sorry, the case study is different.
Sure. Yeah. Talk about portfolios as well. Like, let's say you have a few portfolios, multiple candidates, multiple portfolios. How exactly do you pick who to invite to the interview?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I did forget something. I'm breaking the interview here because I'm going all over the place on questions. One other thing for resumes, that's if someone individual is looking at it. A lot of times there's a computer software program that looks at it. And so these computer programs essentially scan the page and they pull out words. And if you have keywords in there that were the same keywords that the hiring manager or the HR person posted, that's how you get that 1,000 resumes submitted down to like 50. And then the hiring manager looks at those 50. If you have questions on how to make your resume have more keywords, hire a resume coach and have them look at your resume, and they'll probably make it ugly because a lot of these beautiful artistic UX designed resumes, the screen readers, they can't pick up on some of the art and the words. So have it go through someone professionally and they'll test out and make sure that it has the right stuff. Okay. Case studies and portfolios. That's what I care about. I pretty much don't look at a resume until after I've looked at the case study. If I feel like their portfolio is strong enough and I'm kind of curious, then I'll take like maybe a few minutes or a minute, 30 seconds, 15 seconds, and skim the resume. But I spend a significant time on the portfolio. First thing I look for is their case studies. Do they have different types of ones? I know that you can't show everything in one case study, so I like to open up more than one to see if they have different skill sets. Then I look for technical skills here, not necessarily soft skills. I'm looking to see where's their skill in research. Do they know how to conduct research? Do they know about different research methodologies? If you're an entry level, the expectation is not that you're going to be perfect on picking the right methodology or that you'll even know that many, but I want to see that you know more than one. You've done more than just a user interview, right? Or you've been interested and curious about it. I also look to see, do they have qualitative analytical research in there and quantitative? I'm looking to see if they followed the UX workflow. What is their understanding of the whole UX workflow? Do they think it's just design portion only and test and we're out? Or do they understand it as it starts with UX strategy, why am I doing this? And then it moves into the interviews and the ideation and the design and the testing. So I'm looking for that portion. That's really, really huge. If someone doesn't have that workflow down, I don't care if it's the most beautiful resume, a beautiful portfolio in the world, I will not interview this person most likely, unless it's really just a design only, UI only role. But a lot of the way that UX is moving and the way product design is moving, it's moving into more holistic understanding. So I do think for the case study, you really want to show that. So these are the things that I look at pre-bringing someone on to an interview. I do look at those technical skills. I also look to see how they made certain decisions within their design flow when they tested it. Did they learn certain pieces of feedback from the users that created a change in their design? And how easy is that to see? After the technical piece is done, I am going to look at and say, well, how good is their UI or their UX kind of at the end? If it's got all the trimmings technically and it looks great, that's pretty cool. I'm probably going to bring that person in, and then I'm going to double check and interview like crazy to see were those designs actually theirs or were they somebody else's. So if they aren't yours, just have some sort of UI piece on the side to be like, those aren't mine. However, I can still show you what I got, right? So that's what I look for pre-interview. In the interview, there are different things that I look for in a case study.
Awesome. So that's cool. Anything else, Nell, you want to add? And I wanted to jump in and take a couple of questions from the audience as well to make it as interactive as possible. Anything else you want to add in terms of biggest mistakes that candidates make in their portfolio or resume? Like the top, what are the top three, you think?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest mistakes I see is that people think that jobs are one size fits all and that case studies are one size fits all, and they're really not. Before you go into an interview, if you can, reach out to the hiring manager or the HR rep, ask them to talk to the hiring manager and ask them specifically what this person is looking for, right? Not every UX role is built the same. Sometimes you're not looking for the person with the best technical skills. You're looking for the person with technical skills that are good enough and they specifically have a skill set in the problem space that you're solving for, whether that's an industry or whether that's like a business ecosystem thing, right? So imagine you're like a VP and you're interviewing for a job, right? And this role is about turning around the company, right? They're probably going to look for someone who has experience in dealing with difficult situations and doing turnarounds, right? And so they'll pick that VP over, say, another one. And so my point is the personalization is important. Don't forget to say specifically what it is you want from your career. Because if you say, hey, I'm really looking to develop myself in these ways and these skill sets, then that person's going to be like, oh, that is actually a great fit. Even though this other person was technically better, you actually fit the business need that we have and the business challenge we have. You are the right cultural fit for us. So we're going to hire you. So a lot of people forget to say that, or they're afraid to say it and be vulnerable about it because there's a fear that they'll actually say the wrong thing, that company is not looking for that thing. And again, that's where I'm saying you really need to be honest with yourself, because a lot of these UX roles look really, really different, and you want to end up with the one that helps the career that you want, not any just role that there is. So don't forget to look at that. The other thing is, I've seen this with senior designers too. Prepare for your interview. It's so basic. If you don't have your story down, it's going to be really, really obvious. If you can't explain why you made certain decisions, like why you picked 6 people to interview or why you made a design choice, it just comes off looking really underprepared and like you don't care. And it's really insulting to the interviewer. The other thing I could say is don't over prepare. I've seen people who essentially, they just memorize their script from boot camp, and you could tell that, did they write it or did someone else write it? And they just like memorized it. And then when you ask them questions, you can't, no one can like speak on the fly about why they made those decisions. And it makes you kind of question the whole case study, even if it was great. Does this person actually know what they're talking about? Or did they get lucky and have a good case study with a good group, right? So you want to build confidence in whoever's interviewing you, that they know who you truly, genuinely are. So don't be afraid to share what you want. Don't be afraid to share where your skills are weaker. Obviously, don't say anything negative about yourself, but be honest. And I think that's like that's the most that an interviewer could ask for.
Awesome. Thank you, Niall. So let's take a couple of quick questions from the audience, and I see, and that way we'll come back to portfolios and talking about case studies a little bit in more depth. So this is the most upvoted question so far. It's not exactly related to portfolios or case studies, but Rachel is asking, I'm transitioning careers from visual design into UX, and I'm almost 40 years old. I'm concerned that my age may confuse hiring managers because while I am novice with UX, I have a lot of work experience also with senior roles. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I don't think that you should be concerned about your age. One, it's illegal to not hire someone based on their age. So that's one thing. If you feel like that's happening, you need to be aware of that. But two, I don't think people know that it's a new career. People know that people are transitioning. So I wouldn't be concerned about that. In fact, I was a colleague of mine. She was closer around that age as well. She transitioned out into UX. And again, you do start back sometimes as in a junior role. Your title goes down and your salary usually goes down as well. But with that said, I know people that have been promoted twice in 1 year, people that have been promoted once every year for a few years. And it's usually because they have this previous experience working elsewhere, that they already know the soft skills. They know how to share impact. They know how to share, how to collaborate and how to lead teams. They naturally take on a leadership role. So keep in mind that while it feels like you're starting over and visually it may look like you're starting over on your resume with the title and the salary, you're actually not. You're starting from a much higher position with skills already built. And that's what you bring to the table. With people who are transitioning, you need to make sure that your positioning statement, how you brand yourself, is very clear. So you want to brand yourself as not someone, well, I'm starting over in a new role. I used to do UI. I know it's very different. Now I'm going to start over. You need to say, hey, I have a lot of experience doing brand positioning, understanding how people use color, understanding how people work through things, but I just never felt like I was complete. Like I felt that there was something missing. I always constantly found myself doing insert UX skills into sentence, the user empathy, testing my designs with other people, A/B testing some colors every now and then, if you did or if you didn't. And I found that UX was the role for me. So now I'm looking to kind of course correct my career and do something that I'm really passionate about. With that comes experience leading teams, mentoring people, collaborating. I feel like those soft skills put me in a really great place with stakeholders because I understand how to work with people who work in different departments with different needs. I'll have empathy towards them. I know how to talk to them because I've worked in roles that were not UX, so I know what's going to sound jargony. So I'm actually a best fit because I come in with a lot of facilitation experience. I'm already strong in UI. So now it's just about building up that skill set for UX, and that's what I'm looking to do here. And hopefully I can grow very quickly and be a self-starter in your company, right? Very different message. Essentially, it says, I've already got the skill sets, just looking to hone in a couple of things. Will you take a chance on someone who's already got like 20 years of experience? Wow. I would definitely listen to that person.
Yeah, I love that answer, Noel. I think you would definitely get invited. I think, yeah, that's really good. And Rachel, also keep in mind that actually graphic design, visual design, right? It's like awesome field to transition into UX from, right? So it's
But
one
be
of the
careful.
easiest transitions.
It is, but be careful that you don't push too hard on the UI because people are going to be like, she's only UI. You really, really need to show how you do other stuff. So in your case study, you're going to need to be very clear on that you did research, something that's the opposite of UI, or that you are doing UX and you got really interesting to process maps. Pick something specific that doesn't have a UI side. They already know you got the design side. So be very clear, even if you don't love process maps, just flowchart, architecture, whatever. Just make sure it's clear that you can do more than that.
Awesome. So that's great. Rachel, hopefully that clarifies it for you. OSC is asking if we have years in a design field, architecture, in parentheses, should we avoid applying for internships, go for junior level UX jobs after a boot camp?
Architecture, like actually like building stuff. Oh, I know people who transitioned from architecture and they've gone straight to working for Apple and like Google. Part of the reason is that some of the software that you use in those companies, like in architecture, is actually being used in the UX world today. But UXers don't actually have skills with it. So now, again, another example of how transitioning is not actually negative, it's actually like bump you up. I would say it's up to you. If you're in a place where you can financially take an internship and the internship's really interesting, then go for it. I think a lot of these internships are targeted towards people who are like coming right out of college, at least the ones that I have seen. So I'm not sure that, and sometimes they specify that, right? A lot of like Google and stuff, they have like a internship hiring program in Salesforce that comes right out of either college or a master course or a boot camp. So you could go in that route, and sometimes those internships usually lead to roles. And again, it's a financial question. Of course, at those companies that are doing those sort of internships, you're going to be doing a very niche form of UX, very, very targeted, because they're large companies, right? So your scope is going to be so small, especially as an entry-level person. It's great if that's the direction you want to take, go for it. However, I think sometimes it's more interesting to see if you can take a role that allows you to do more generative work. That way you could really explore which part you like more. Do you like the building of the product? Do you like the researching of it? And also when you go and interview, you'll have more interesting case studies to show because they'll be more broad and less kind of niche. And those niche roles can sometimes limit your application in the future.
Yeah, that's awesome, Noel. And by the way, I'm not sure what your name is exactly, but it says OOS. Is it OSC? Architecture is actually another awesome field that's, we see candidates have tremendous success transition into UX from architecture. So that's probably like both of them, graphic design, architecture, et cetera. And I would add to that if you can find a great internship, the problem with internships sometimes is there are a lot of internships where you just kind of pigeonholed into this like very low level type of work, and it might not be great for your portfolio, right? I would instead just volunteer and basically find a company, find a startup, and just do work for them. And if you volunteer, right, or basically do it pro bono, right, you have much more leverage, right, in terms of the actual work that you do. Not just, that fits the budget that small business or tiny nonprofit has for you to, so you don't just like wireframe and stop right there because they don't have any more money to pay you, right? But because you actually have leverage, right? And you can say, I'll do the interviews, I'll do research, I'll do, information architecture for you, basically map everything out, test it out, right? So if you can find a great, but yeah, as Noel said, lots of internships, the problem with those is they're reserved for students, right? And unless you're from like a top school, that can be somewhat challenging if you're switching careers. So yeah, that's where basically pro bono work comes in, volunteering, startups, businesses, and ideally a digital product, right? Not just a, static website, but ideally something interactive, right? Where you can kind of use your UX skills more. So hopefully that clarifies it a bit. So Noel, let's jump into the next question for you. coming back to portfolios, when you evaluate portfolios, do you give equal weight to all the case studies?
Oh, to all the case studies, do you mean, can you explain that a little further?
Yeah, let's say you're looking at someone's portfolio, right? And they have 3 or 4 case studies. How do you differentiate between those? Like what's important for you? Are they all equal? You look for, ones that are more interesting than someone?
Yeah, that's a good question. So this is where it comes back to what the role is hiring. Sometimes when you're on a team and there's a spot open, you already know the skill sets of the people on your team. And maybe those skill sets are they're really good in UI or they're really good in workshops, but no one has like operations experience or research experience, even though it's not like the targeted role. So you might, when you're going through the case studies, notice that this person has a gap that's a skill gap for the team. And that becomes something that you are excited by, especially if that's a skill gap that you're looking to fill, right? So that could be one way of weighting it. Another way of weighting it is when it's more entry level positions. I'm not as like keen on UI only designs. Even if that person spent so much time just focusing on like the visual, then to me it's kind of like a throwaway. They don't know the whole like workflow, right? When it's senior level, what people are usually looking for, I know this because I've asked around at a lot of different places and mentors of my own. They're really looking at that level for your thought process, and that is this design looks a certain way because of this reason, and that reason is heuristics and because a user said X. And so that's what needs to stand out and needs to stand out in a really big way. In fact, at those levels, you don't even really see people walking through the whole UX workflow. They have a slide at the beginning that's like, and of course I did the UX workflow research. If you want to know the studies, I can pull that for you. They're in the appendix. Now let me get to the solution on the why, and I'll explain the insights as I explain the design. And that's what gets you to the next level. So that thought process needs to stand out really strong. So I look for a lot of people, even in the entry levels, to understand their thought process. Is someone who's telling me a story, do they make a complex project, a complex topic simple? That's the type of stuff. Other than that, I don't think I weight it in any different way. I just kind of do a quick skim and say, okay, they generally hit the points. This is how I would score them. So I probably put together some basic scorecard with some characteristics on things that I'm particularly looking for. And I score them 1 through 5, 1 through 10, 1 through 20, whatever the number is going to be. And I say, okay, they're like high enough to go through. Let me actually get on the phone and talk to this person and see if they know what they're talking about. And then we pull out those soft skills. So that's kind of like the process that I take.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. Now, how do you tell hypothetical projects apart from real ones?
Yeah, so sometimes people say it at the very beginning. That's a good way of telling. The other thing that you can do is you can ask if there's if there's a stakeholder involved. If there's a stakeholder, it's probably usually a real project. That's also great because this person now has some sort of stakeholder experience. So doing pro bono and volunteering and freelance, very important, not just for real world experience, but before stakeholder experience. That can really get you a job versus someone right out of a boot camp. You worked with a stakeholder. You dealt with something difficult. In the case studies too, to me, it doesn't matter. It's tough. It really is tough. So I have some people who I've talked to, again, not at Amex, mentors of mine who have said they hate looking at hypotheticals because they're just not real world. The real world is messy. You don't get to do your perfect design because sometimes technology can't build it, or your stakeholder has something different in mind, or you don't have the resources or the money to do it. Like, these are real world challenges, and they come up in business in the real world. And so a lot of times when you're interviewing, being able to talk about these challenges, how I advocated for my design despite someone fighting me against it, how I managed and prioritized because the timeline kept changing, how I talk to engineering to understand if something actually feasible, how would I redesign it? Those constraints are usually what make things interesting. The problems are what make things interesting. And they show your thought process. How do I deal with conflict and change? that is hard to come by in a theoretical. So if you're going to do a theoretical project, because sometimes that's the only option, what you want to say is you want to call out those constraints that normally would happen in the real world. You can say this was a hypothetical project. However, I understand that there are certain constraints around time, constraints around budget. You can even build them right into your design. This would be super fascinating. I would love to see this in a case study. Hypothetical project. I was going in this direction, but then I got a constraint that certain things weren't able to be built by engineering. So I was forced to change my design. This is how I changed it. Oh, I found out it wasn't accessible. So this is how I changed it. And maybe the end design looks like it compared to the original design. But you know what I saw? I saw what you would do with all of your creativity and all of your genius, what that beautiful original design looked like. And then I also saw the thought process of someone who was still able to make it work despite constraints. That is interesting. That's really, really interesting. And that's how you get around the hypothetical.
Awesome. Yeah, that's cool. So coming back to resumes and LinkedIn, Noel, do you want to add in? I know you already spoke about this a bit earlier. Any additional tips for resumes, LinkedIn, you think folks would benefit from?
Yeah, one thing that I've been noticing people doing on LinkedIn is they post articles. So they're like, my colleague just wrote this article on XYZ and I'm reposting it and it's super interesting. Or I wrote this article, or I read this blog and this was cool. People who tend to kind of post some of that stuff, I'm really like, wow, you're like spending time like reading and self-educating and not getting stale. Like, that's cool. I should do that. And then I don't get around to doing it, unfortunately. But it's important to stay up to date. The industry is changing so much, and we're learning so much about psychology and how people think and feel, and about AI and ChatGPT. And it's cool to know that there's someone there who's like thinking about the way things could be. And you start to indicate that when you post stuff. It also starts to develop your network, and it shows this person has a network of people who are UXers. Maybe they know more about UX and how to run UX better than I do. And if there's one thing that a hiring manager wants, they want to hire people who are better than them, or who could really help shape their team. That's also the sign, I think, of a really, really good culture, to surround yourself with people that you're going to learn from, and that you think the other colleagues are going to learn from too. And if you're ever in a position too to be hiring someone in any role, above, equal, below, to bring on people that you think you can learn from, because at the end of the day, it's all about you learning, growing, developing your passion. And so I think that's important. And when you do LinkedIn and you get those networks and you post around, this is a person who talks to other UXers who might know more. They'd be really cool to have on board.
Awesome. Yeah, that's cool. So I see Rachel is asking great questions that get the most of those here. So let's take Rachel. So we'll come back to your question because we already asked one, but let's hopefully come back to this other popular one. So Curtis is asking, real experience is a larger box in the system. I assume you're referring to that diagram that we showed. How do you get experience if you can't get a job? Yeah, I can definitely tell. I'll let Noel go first, but yeah, I can tell you more about that.
How do you get experience if you can't get a job? Yeah, welcome to almost like 80% of UXers. Yeah, so Michael, you talked a little bit about this before, which is the freelance work and the hypothetical route. Like, that is the way. I do notice people who take on freelance. When I do look at the resume, or if it comes out in an interview, I'm like, oh, you were doing like freelance. This is someone who's like really serious and who loves the work so much, they're willing to do it for a while and not get paid for it. Like, I really respect that, to be honest, personally. That is the route. And you have to bolster your resume and make it look like you have a lot of job experience, because the truth is, like, sometimes when you enter a business, you don't always have a mentor or a coach, or sometimes even another colleague. Sometimes you're a team of one or two to train you, and you don't want to be in a position where you're not going to be able to succeed there. And the hiring manager is going to want to know that you know the basics. And so sometimes going to a boot camp, that can show that you probably know the basics. But sometimes if you don't really focus or pay attention in the boot camp, then it's going to be like, well, how much do you actually know? Like, I don't have time to train you. This is not the right fit, right? So to remove that doubt and be more credible, you do need that real world experience. And that usually requires a lot of proactiveness to go out and find it. And you'll have to rewrite your resume to show it. put up to the top, I did freelance here, or I consulted here, or I spoke at an event there, and then go back into your old work experience and say, what was a little bit related to UX for marketing, right? I was like, I loved A/B testing and getting that qualitative information on how people did their demand generation and like how the structure. I went back to an essay that I wrote in college about this stuff. So you got to get creative and show that it's always been there, right? And it's doable. Trust me, you can pretty much do it for like any field. You just got to be really creative with it. But it's not enough to just do that. You really got to get it on your resume that you were hired by someone, you did something. And there's so many people out there who need help right now. Resources are lost. It should be possible to find something. Yeah.
And Curtis and others who have a similar question, we actually have a whole article written about this, how to build experience and case studies, right? So if you just find a blog section of our site, right, there's that article about how you can build real experience without actually having a job. And should also be a recording from another event that we did specifically on that topic as well. In summary, yeah, it's basically, as I said earlier, and Noel mentioned pretty much all these great points. Just volunteering for startups, nonprofits, pro bono work, internships, if you can get a good one, apprenticeship sometimes, but I would say, typically volunteering and just like finding company. It can be like challenging sometimes, right? Because ideally you want to do it with a team, right? Because most employers, they look for that team collaboration experience as well. Ideally, you also want to have some type of mentor, because if you do not, then you may get stuck and that project may never get anywhere. Or, it may take you like a year instead of 3 months, right? So, and that's why, like in the program, for example, we have all that structure set up for you, right? And so basically, that's kind of our bread and butter, is like that real experience built in. But you can try doing something similar on your own, and if you, with enough motivation, can just take longer, but it can work as well. All right, Noel, how is your interviewing process actually structured in terms of like screening, phone, face-to-face? Like, how does it work?
Yeah, so again, I won't speak directly for Amex, but I have talked to a lot of different mentors and a lot of different friends at different places, and I've noticed trends. And so I'll share the trends. I've noticed two different ways that people do it. One is usually uploading the resume to like whatever the LinkedIn site or the other sites are. Sometimes companies have, I don't know what I'm talking about with that. Anyway, you upload it, it gets sent. Usually what happens next is a phone call. It's a screener. That usually happens from the HR rep. If it's a smaller company, it tends to happen from someone who could be the hiring manager, so you never know. Some companies, the HR person doesn't know anything about UX, and it'll be pretty clear on the phone and a little bit awkward. And so you'll be explaining answers, and they're not really having a conversation with you. They're just essentially like typing notes. And sometimes companies will have someone who really, really specialized, or they know about UX because they're trying to build up a UX, HR department. And so they'll actually know what you're talking about, and you'll have more of a conversation. You never really know what you're going to get. Either way, those screeners, they're usually questions that are like prepared ahead of time. So the person on the phone is like not making them up. Either this is what they have for all of their design or UX or product roles, and they're trained up to say that, or maybe the hiring manager has hopped in and like added a couple of extra roles because they know specifically this is the challenge, right? Getting back to that, this role is personal. Does this person fit those personal things? They'll throw in some of those things. So that's what you can expect. The person's usually going to send those notes to the hiring manager. The hiring manager will review them and say, yay or nay, this is a fit, it's not a fit, stuff like that. That is usually how it goes. I assume in some places, though, that doesn't happen, and the recruiter might know enough about the job to tell the hiring manager, this is the person, just go for it. And I've been in those situations too, where I trusted a recruiter so much, I was like, trust whoever you give me. That's one way of doing it. Again, sometimes the recruitment process comes straight through the company. Sometimes these processes come through recruiters or consultant agencies. So there can be a whole bunch of different ways to get your name in. So you can look at consulting agencies as well. After that phone screen, if you do get the next interview, this is where it starts to differ. I've noticed that some people have it's usually 3 interviews. Normally, that's usually how it goes. The first interview is usually a case study. Well, sometimes it's a case study. For some other companies, it's that just initial talk. But either way, the first 2 interviews are meeting the hiring manager, talking, seeing if you're a good fit, talking about the company, that cultural fit and that general knowledge. And then they'll bring you in for an actual case study and stuff like that. And sometimes that can be with one person and you'll have multiple case studies with different people. A lot of times companies will do a panel. So you'll have a couple of people on the call with you looking at your case study. It's always important in that case study to ask them when they should ask questions. Would you like to ask questions in the middle, or would you like me to wait to the end? You can also tell them directly what you'd wish. So if you're someone who gets distracted easily because someone's jumping into questions, you can set that at the beginning and that's fine. But that's the technical interview essentially. So you have your technical interview, you have your cultural fit interview and other stuff. And then the last step is you'll usually be sent to someone either higher up or someone else around the team to meet a few people. And so that's usually a good sign. So the team might ask a couple of more questions of you. Sometimes some companies will ask you to interview with someone from product and someone from engineering because you're going to partner with them. That's usually a pretty good sign because it shows that they're really embedded and integrated and that they're working together and that those companies, those teams really respect UX. So I know it's a scary thing to have that happen, but it's also kind of a good sign at the company. So that's why it's important to understand how these other departments work. And then some companies will set you up for almost a case study, itself that they give you. I've seen people do take-home case studies, but not that often actually. Usually they're on the call for research, for example. They may actually have you conduct an interview in person, or for an ops role, they may have you prepare, how would you, in this scenario where these are the problems, show me how you would do X, Y, Z, and then you present, your case study, your thought process, and then they ask you questions. Or for design, how would you design, what's your design thought process for this? I've actually even seen those sort of case study interviews for product roles. So some companies do that, some companies don't. Even within the company, it's different. Some departments do, some departments don't, but that is potentially something that could happen. Again, people aren't looking for perfection at that point. They're really looking for thought process. That's what how well do you know the workflow and what is your thought process for achieving it? After that's all over, it's pretty much done. A lot of teams will get together and they'll have some sort of scoring metric. I think Amazon is most famous for this. They're a big panel where they actually get in a room and everyone shares their notes on the candidate and they talk about what level they are. And if they think that's the right level for the job they interviewed and they're good, they'll get it. They'll also specifically Amazon specifically does this, looks to see if there are a lot of different stories that were told, if that person told the same group the same set of examples. Oh, does this person only have one project under their belt, right? So if it's your best story and you're thinking you're telling your best story to different people because they haven't heard it, they're probably going to end up sharing that story and that's all you got. So just again, something to keep in mind to try and vary it up or maybe even reference another interview. I was talking to your colleague and I had this great story on this. I definitely recommend, sharing that with them. However, for you, I'd like to give another example, right? So prep for those interviews, multiple stories for the same question. And that's it. And then you'll usually get a call and it'll be negotiation.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. Love it. It's very comprehensive. So that's awesome. So let's take a couple more questions from the audience and then we'll do a couple more questions that we have prepared for you. And I'll be wrapping up the interview part, and then we'll probably do a little bit more Q&A at the end. So just quickly, Julie is asking thoughts on cover letters. Do you read them?
Oh, cover letters. No, never. I don't remember the last time I got one.
See, that was quick and honest. All right. So Vivi is asking many JD. I think we kind of already answered this question, Vivi. Many job descriptions require 3 to 5 years of experience. How to break in to that first screening without those years of experience. So yeah, that's pretty much what we already addressed earlier. Any additional, anything else you want to add on that? No.
No, I think this goes across industry. I've seen the 3 to 5 years of experience on probably like every field I've been in. It's I don't know what to say about it. Don't look too closely at that. Look more at your skill level again, right? For people who are transitioning, maybe you don't have 3 to 5 years of experience in UX, but you have 20 years of experience doing something else, right? So it's like it's hard to say. Prove yourself with your case study and with your interview and with your mentorship.
Yeah, don't take those JDs like don't look at it as like you have to be that perfect candidate, because almost often they don't that perfect candidates may not exist at all, right? So just
and oh, sorry, Michael, I thought you were done.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna add too. Sometimes they're really old. Sometimes people are like reusing like 10-year-old job descriptions, and sometimes you have a hiring manager that like personalizes it for the job. So you really don't know. So just like apply anyway.
Yeah. Well, if you see they need someone with 20 years of experience in Figma, maybe that's the red flag.
Interesting. Time doesn't seem to line up.
So Regina is also asking, how do you approach companies or startups for pro bono volunteering work as a UX UI designer? Yeah, I can talk about that, but Noelle, I'll let you go first.
Actually, I'll punt this one over to you because I don't know specifically the answer, but I do know that startups, they have a lot of risk. It's not an easy market right now to get investing. So I think it's generally more difficult to get into a startup if you're entry level and junior. So it's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, and also keep in mind, Regina, that there are many different types of startups and businesses, right? It's not all about like venture funded tech startups, right? So there are lots of bootstrap startups, right, that are much more hungry for resources, right? And what you could do is just talk to accelerators, talk to various incubators, various kind of associations, organization, communities, right? It can be like a little bit intimidating, of course, because you kind of have to network and put yourself out there and basically maybe go to events, go to virtual events like this, but for like, startups and entrepreneurs, et cetera, and just offer your help. It can be difficult sometimes, right? Or you could apply to BeginX as well. We'll do all that legwork for you and you can just build experience. Just kidding. I mean, it's, you can do it in many different ways. All right, so Rachel has another question with lots of upvotes here. So Rachel is asking about case studies. How in depth would you create case studies on a website? I feel like all the case studies from boot camps are the same and super long. And all right, so you sneak it in a second question, Rachel. If we make it to the interview stage, how in depth do you speak about case studies versus soft hard skills in which you reference case studies?
Yeah, so case studies that are in your portfolio, you should generally be behind some sort of password. That way, not everyone can view them except for the person looking. However, you might leave 1 or 2 open just if someone's like browsing around. Oh, that's an interesting person. Maybe like that's cool. And those tend to be a little bit more lightweight and don't give everything away, but they tend to show the workflow. And then in the interview, when you do your case study, you want to ask either beforehand or right in the interview, what are you most interested in? I'm going to spend a lot of time focusing more on those details and I'll skim over some of the others. And then they'll tell you because people want you to succeed in interviews, right? They want to find the person to hire. So they'll be like, I'm really interested in these specific areas. I'm like, great, I'll make sure to talk about those in detail. And that's how you figure out how to weigh it. And what was the other question?
If we make it to the interview stage, how in depth do you speak about case studies versus soft and hard skills?
Yeah, so the soft skills, you can throw them into your case study as you explain your process. Like, this is what I did and this is how I did it, right? And the how I did it is about like operations and process, but it's also about soft skills because you can talk about like challenges. Like the challenge I faced was there was another teammate who disagreed with me and felt really strongly, and we had different preferences. So the way that I handled it is we went back to our goals and we took a look at our objectives and we matched that against our research. And what we actually discovered was that there was a third option that neither of us had really talked about, and that's what we went with. So that's actually an example of not only a process, but a soft skill. Also, a lot of these interviews, they'll stop, the case study portion at some point, and they'll ask you soft skill questions, specifically, kind of measuring that, that EQ, emotional intelligence, I think is like the term for it. So they'll ask you those soft skill questions as well, and you'll get to answer them directly.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense now. And by the way, in terms of case studies, you can also, like, first of all, I would just recommend researching and just reviewing a lot of, finding a lot of examples, maybe not a lot, but like a few of the best examples. Also, we actually have another, can't remember if it's on our website, if it's on our YouTube. On the website, we may have an older recording of a portfolio workshop, right? And actually the instructor there, she goes over a couple of examples, maybe one example is kind of step by step in terms of like what a great case study looks like. And you can also go to our YouTube and basically just type BeginX in YouTube. It's not like a big popular YouTube channel, but it's basically what it is we just post all of the recordings over there. We haven't been really like promoting it, but it's so not a lot of views, but a lot of value. So take a look. There's one that someone who used to be at The Economist did with us pretty recently. Yeah, that one is really good about portfolios and case studies, all the details there. It's like an hour and a half, so lots of insights in there. All right, Rachel, so hopefully that answered your question. So Noel, what are you already touched on this a little bit, but maybe you want to answer this in a bit more detail. What are the specific top hard and soft skills that you're looking for, especially in more junior candidates?
Collaboration is a really big one. How do you collaborate with other people? Sometimes you can do that through teamwork. Sometimes you can explain that if you led some sort of facilitation workshop. The other one is how do you take and receive feedback? You can learn about that through several different types of questions. You can also tell if someone's, sometimes you can tell how much of a, team player somebody is, how they discuss the work. Is it you want to brag about yourself in an interview? You definitely want to say what you did, but you don't want to make like the star of the story that without you, yes, maybe without you, the project would have failed. And maybe that is something that you should say. But you want to do it in a humble way, right? So it's not necessarily it's a balance between the ego and about sharing who you are. And that can come off with how you speak. Some of those are examples of that. The other one is storytelling, which I actually haven't mentioned a lot, and it's huge. A good portion of UX is storytelling. It's how do you present the story? How do you get someone to feel emotional and engaged and like on the edge of their seat? It's a really, really hard skill, and it's one that you build over time. But that's a really, really big one as well. So I think those are like the really big ones. There's a few more, but generally that's like those are like top of mind for me right now.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. In terms of design challenges, Noel, do you guys, or if you don't want to speak specifically about MX, what is your experience with design challenges? Like how often are those given? Is it whiteboard or take home? Based on your experience?
Gosh, I am going to pass on that one. I don't actually fully know a strong enough answer, so I'm so sorry on that. I have only led one, but it was kind of through somebody else. But yeah, I'll pass on that one. Just be prepared that they could happen.
Awesome. Yeah, that's based on our research, it's like 50-50. Like you would get it roughly 50% of the time in terms of those like whiteboarding or virtual whiteboarding challenges. Take-home challenges can happen as well, but those are a little bit less frequent. And in some roles, you would not get any challenges, but definitely prepare, right? Because it's often used to measure basically how well you can think, right, about your thought process and how you solve problems, et cetera. So that's very, very important to practice. Okay. Noel, what are your top 3 tips on presenting your portfolio?
start by introducing yourself really briefly and ask what people want to hear about. A lot of times people just be like, okay, ready for my case study? And they like throw up onto the screen. You're like, whoa, right? If you stop and say, what are you interested in learning about? Where would you like me to like focus my time? Can you tell me about some of the challenges that maybe you're looking to solve, well, not like directly, but essentially what you're doing is you're creating an emotional connection to your audience. You're not just like speaking at them. You're speaking with them because you know they want to hear something from this information. Everyone wants to know about your case study, but no one really cares about the project. They care about your thought process, right? They want to feel like they're already working with you. So if you can act like this is, I'm working with you, what do you, okay, let me focus in on that. That's number one. Number two is be succinct. Don't be too wordy, get to the point. And number three is presentation skills. I'm just gonna move my computer because it's not attached to my cord and the battery is getting low. So these are examples of how you can change your voice, make it louder, make it softer, make it faster, make it slower. That can help a very boring, like long case study with lots of data feel a little bit more emotional and more connected so that people, at least when they're zoning out, pay attention to the important parts. So those are the three things I would keep in mind.
Awesome. So Noelle, while you're continue figuring out your battery and charging situation, I want to take a quick question from Angelica. So Angelica asked, how do you develop effective job search strategies? So Angelica, first of all, yeah, you could first of all just refer to that book that I mentioned earlier, 2 Hour Job Search. Really good for networking, informational interviews type of search. And again, networking is mentioned by everyone pretty much all the time. And it's also very important to figure out what is actually ineffective, right? Because networking is, again, mentioned by pretty much all the time based on like our research with tons of hiring managers, interviewing our own grads, how they found their jobs, right? It's like 80% of the time, it's either referral or networking, right? And or recruiter reaching out, right? But for that, you also need to first become a great candidate, right? And kind of have all those search assets. Now, Noelle, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I actually thought that was very well said. I have to be honest, I'm very impressed with the comments and the presentation that you gave at the beginning and your answers. They're spot on. And in some cases, I'm actually learning some new things myself.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds great to hear. So we have another someone named Tyjust asking salary negotiation. Can you tell us how it will play out?
Salary negotiations. Oh gosh. Honestly, they're a thing. I think people expect you to negotiate. I feel like I read somewhere an article too about this, that, women tend to be more fearful about it as well. So to all those women, know your worth, right? But for men and women, any orientation that you define yourself as, know your worth, right? And to know your worth is to do some research. So go online and take a look at what the average salary ranges are for the roles you're looking at. And keep in mind too, that you'll probably want to take a look at it by region. The other thing that you'll want to look at as well is years in role. So someone could have, you could see a range of this UX designer entry-level senior role is X amount of money annually plus benefits and bonus, but the range is really high and you didn't get that. Well, it could be because you're like super entry level, right? Because they grow the more years you have. So I would say be realistic about your skills and expectations, but also honor your worth and know your worth. And you also sometimes have to make that call, which is this job really interesting, or is this company really interesting? Is this something I'm like willing to accept? In which case I'm not going to complain about it. And then I'm just going to know, okay, after a year or 2 years, I'm leaving unless I get that bump in my salary. So go in prepared. Talk to a mentor specifically who's skilled in this area. You can go to ADP List. I love them. They're a whole bunch of product and designers as well. You can get mentors there. Just coffee chats essentially. And you can ask someone who, hey, does anyone have experience and is really good at negotiation, and run it by them how they would phrase it. I would do that. But expect that. And sometimes there are companies that really do have fixed, they really do have fixed roles. You really can't just get anything, right? There really are ranges. And at some point, some people do price out, and it's really sad because they're awesome, but you don't have the resources. So you have to think empathetically about where your company is as well.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So we will have to wrap up pretty soon. So I have a last question for you from my side, Noelle, and then we'll take maybe a couple more from the chat afterwards, and we'll be wrapping up in a few minutes. The last question for you is, what are some, I love these like top three questions, some common mistakes that you see when candidates make when applying and going through the interviewing process that are specifically like huge turnoffs for you, like that, no, definitely not hiring this person?
Well, I have seen this once, which is actually it. I don't know who it is more for, but sometimes the job, people apply to the wrong role title. They think they're applying to like a junior role and it's a senior role. And then it's kind of like, ugh, like they feel cringy, the business feels cringy. So just like, you do want to double check like what it is. You can always ask like the HR rep in the phone screen, like to confirm the level, because a lot of company titles are different. So that's one thing. The other thing is like really failing to talk about, to me, like the why you did the project, like what comes out of it. I really can't stress that one enough. I've said it a lot. I think that I probably talk about it way more than other UXers, but at the end of the day, like you are doing this work for a reason. And if you show that you like, that you know why you're designing something, it just makes the design way more interesting. So, and I think those are probably like the two things. One other mistake that people make, gosh, yeah, not being prepared with examples of their own work. They bring in a case study that they did at a boot camp that they did with a group. And when I say, oh, show me, are these your designs? And they say, no. And I say, well, can you show me your designs? And they don't like have something to pull up, even if it's just like images not attached to a case study, or same thing with like research, or not like having an example of that. They probably do, but it didn't come to mind because they didn't prepare, or they don't have it because they didn't do it ever, or they don't have it because it's terrible. So you can really avoid that by just preparing.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So for everyone in the audience, yeah, make sure you guys go to the Q&A tab and upvote questions that you're most interested in, because we only have a few more minutes. And yeah, we want to make sure that we address the most popular ones. So I see that. So Rachel is our question champion today. I think asking the most questions. But I think, Rachel, this question that you asked, so we already kind of touched on it, right? How do you create resume that gets you in the door? So already gave some tips on that. Do hiring managers actually take the time to look at the website too? We spoke about that as well. So in case of Noelle, she mentioned she first looks at portfolio and then looks at resume. Some managers do the opposite and kind of use that resume as a quick filter, right? To just kind of very quick way to filter. Because it's it's like a funnel basically. So they have to find, when they have lots of applicants, they have to find ways to select who to speak with. Okay, so let's see. Channing is asking, I'd love to hear how to emphasize soft skills and build this into the resume. Anything else you want to? I know you already spoke about this, Noelle, but anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, it is tough to do, especially with the feedback I gave on try to add quantitative stuff. It'll be projects that tend to have soft skills needed to complete them successfully. That's kind of where it'll show. So like, how many stakeholders did you work with? I worked on a project for a year with 6 stakeholders across multiple fields, product and engineering. There's probably some soft skills there in aligning and communication and transparency and visibility. facilitation. How do I facilitate dialogue? I led a project. These are examples of projects that to do successfully, like I said, require soft skills. And so someone could read that and then in the interview ask you about them, and that's your chance to explain them.
Thank you, Noelle. Yeah, this is great. Jane had a question, so I hadn't taken any questions from Jane yet. So Jane Huntington, I'm in the process of redesigning the UI of a few of my case studies from my cohort after getting feedback from mentors. I feel good about the research and content. The question is, would you take a second look at the candidates you had reviewed before?
Yes, 100%. I have done that in the past, actually. 100%. And if I think the person's a good fit, or maybe they don't come on, there's no reason why I wouldn't recommend that person to a different team or a different person. We all, a lot of UXers really love what they do, and it's a very warm community of people who want to help each other. And I see no reason not to explore someone who's applying again, who's maybe had a year more of experience. Maybe they're the right fit this time.
Thank you guys for your awesome questions here. Thank you so much, Noelle. This was really awesome. So I hope you guys enjoyed the event and got some great tips on how UX managers hire, transitioning into UX. And as I mentioned, so people often ask, as promised, about our program, right? So we're going to tell you, as promised earlier, about that, because it's maybe a great opportunity for some of you to not just build an amazing real client portfolio, but also get basically all the crucial career prep necessary to actually land a UX role, right? So basically, what BeginX is, it's a part-time UX career accelerator program with real mission-driven client projects designed to help people transition into UX without quitting their jobs. We ran multiple cohorts, helped over 140 people or so transition into UX. Alumni have been hired by many top companies like SiriusXM, Coach, ABC News, Meta, JP Morgan, many others, Amex. And recently we have also been ranked by SwitchUp as the best UX program in their particular ranking. The advisors, and thank you, Noelle, the advisors and mentors are also UX practitioners, some companies like Google, IDEO, American Express, The Economist, and many others. Who the program is the best fit for is like a common question. The program is the best fit for people who know UX basics or come from a design, research, creative, tech-related background and look to transition into UX in one of the most effective and affordable ways and without quitting their jobs. We're also pretty selective and look for motivated and committed team players, right? So what you gain afterwards is you build not just the hard skills, but the crucial softer skills that we just discussed, as well as real experience with a robust portfolio, expand your professional network, and basically get ready to land a UX job, right? And because the grads have done so well, we actually offer a money-back guarantee as well. So you either land a UX role or you get your tuition back plus an extra $300 on top of that. So if it sounds like you may be a good candidate, you can learn more at beginx.com. You'll see a link in the chat. With that said, we frequently run different types of events, right? So we will keep you guys updated about upcoming events and share resources via our newsletter that is usually sent every few weeks or so. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and thank you to our wonderful guest speaker, Noelle. It was really amazing. I really appreciate you taking the time and joining us tonight and providing all the valuable insights. All right, it was a huge pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed speaking to everyone today, and it's been great working with you too, Michael.
Awesome. Yeah, really appreciate it. It was amazing insights, comprehensive answers. Loved it.